Good morning. My name is Michel Chossudovsky. This is a program of the Centre for Research on Globalization, Global Research, based in Montreal. And today I would like to focus on the virus, but on what might be described as the political virus. The fact that this COVID-19 is playing a key role in explaining policy decisions at the highest levels of government. We are currently living history, and by far this is one of the most serious economic and social crises in modern history. On the 11th of March 2020, the orders were given from higher up, emanating from the financial establishment, the World Economic Forum, the foundations and the billionaires, to implement a lockdown, confinement, but also the closing down of 193 national economies, namely the member states of the United Nations. Now, reflect on the decision-making process which underlies this decision to close down simultaneously the economies of all these countries and essentially to close down the economy of planet Earth. And we're talking about the real economy. We're not talking about financial institutions. We're talking about real people. We're talking about companies. We're talking about people who have lost their jobs. We're talking about the impact of this measure on employment, poverty, and beyond poverty, famine and despair. And these measures were applied in both the developed countries, essentially the Western world, Japan, Korea, Australia, and in the developing world, namely Southeast Asia, Latin America, and so on. In other words, and of course, sub-Saharan Africa. And how does one explain this decision? If you followed the election campaign in the United States, and I'm fortunately not involved in that debate, we're here in Canada, but Joe Biden says candidly that
we can find the light.
The economic collapse of these 193 countries is caused by the virus, big V. In other words, the virus becomes a political concept. And you may have noticed the political speeches, and they are replicated in Western Europe. Emmanuel Macron in France, Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom. The collapse of the economy is attributed to the virus. Now, I beg to differ, because the virus does not have any impact whatsoever on economic variables. It doesn't affect the levels of employment, it doesn't affect the levels of poverty, it doesn't trigger bankruptcies. What happened? On March 11, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. And it also declared confinement and closure of economic activity, but that decision was not taken by the World Health Organization. But it was taken by the World Economic Forum, powerful financial groups, foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation, so on. They had earlier met in Davos in the month of January, and the narrative is as follows. It says that economic activity at the level of planet Earth is an obstacle to public health, and that you have to close down your economies with a view to resolving a health crisis. Essentially, COVID-19 provides the pretext and the justification to close down the global economy with devastating economic and social consequences. This, together with the mask, social distancing, which are presented to public opinion as a protection to their health, which is absolute rubbish from the scientific point of view. We have tons of studies, and we can even quote Fauci. Although Fauci says one thing a few months ago, and then he refutes and says the mask has to be implemented, the wearing of the mask has to be implemented universally. Now, all these are lies. And when Joe Biden or Bill Clinton make statements blaming the virus for economic collapse, blaming the virus for the closure of the national economy, well, my first reaction, that borders on ridicule. It borders on stupidity, but it's not stupidity. It's fraud. It's corruption. It's a lie. Anybody knows, common sense, that if you close down your economy during a public health crisis, you paralyze all economic activities, and that in turn, let's be very clear, the impact of this closure of the economy is far more serious than the pandemic itself. It has impacts on mortality and morbidity, and scientists can corroborate that, and social scientists, economists have analyzed it, and the international organizations such as the ILO and even the World Bank have acknowledged it. But what they don't acknowledge it is the decision-making process from higher authority of the financial establishment, global capitalism, dictating this measure. And why do they do that? It seems absurd. Why do they need to impoverish people and contribute to bankruptcy? Well, there's a very simple reason to that, is that they have increased and expanded their wealth, and that started in the course of the month of February with the financial crash. And now what is happening? The landscape of the global economy is in disarray. Small and medium-sized enterprises have been destabilized and triggered into bankruptcy almost everywhere. And we're talking about planet Earth. But there's another thing. The architects of this project, which involved the Rockefellers, the Gates, and so on, I don't need to list the names. This is a project which has been carefully engineered and planned well in advance. But what happens when we go back to so-called normalization? We have bankrupt companies, we have crisis in the service economy, crisis in real production. In fact, you might say that this is a conflict between finance capital on the one hand and real capitalism on the other, but it is also a devastating process which affects the livelihood of millions and millions and billions of people who lose their jobs, who lose their livelihood, who can't make ends meet, who can't pay their debts. And then what happens? In the aftermath, which is called the reset, okay, they call it the reset. And now the reset is to come to the rescue of those who have been the victims of this crisis. But of course, it's all due to COVID. And then they blame COVID on China. What happens is that these companies, the financial establishment will start picking up the pieces of the bankrupt enterprises, the airline companies which are in bankruptcy. Virtually every single major airline in Latin America is in bankruptcy. What will they do? They will appropriate the real wealth with the masses of money wealth which they have accumulated in the course of the crisis, particularly during the month of February. Now, there are many lies. First of all, and I've reflected on this, the act of closing down the global economy is an act of genocide. We might describe it as economic genocide. It has the bearing on the lives of millions and millions of people. That is corroborated. And it is not something which is spontaneous. And it's certainly not due to the virus, to this small virus. No. And now they are telling us, and we are believing that, the virus responsible for poverty, unemployment, despair. It's a nonsensical statement, but people are intimidated with the fear campaign, with the disinformation campaign, and with the fact that this virus is considered as very, very dangerous, threatening the future of humanity. It's not. All the science and peer-reviewed reports confirm that the virus, the coronavirus 19, which incidentally its official name is SARS-2. Its official name is SARS-2, which means it's part of the SARS-1 family of viruses, and it is tagged as something which is similar or akin to seasonal influenza coupled with pneumonia. I don't want to get into the discussion of the virus itself, but I can say, having reviewed the literature, that the RT-PCR test, which is there to confirm positive cases, doesn't mean anything, because a positive case doesn't mean that you have it, and a negative case might mean that you do have it. But the virologists have come certainly to a consensus that the PCR test doesn't provide you with an information as to the dangers of COVID-19, and it's not even possible to say whether it was COVID 1, 2, 3, 4 or 19 which were responsible, because it's an aggregate of viruses and particles. Now the second element is the estimates and what our governments have been doing, not in all countries, but you can see it in some countries, certainly in the United States and Canada and Britain. They are there, they want to push up the numbers. They even hire consulting firms. In Britain, they hired Deloitte Touche, an accounting firm. They want the numbers to go up. They want more tests. And with more tests, of course, they will get positive cases. But those positive cases don't mean a thing. And in the United States, again, there are even financial incentives which are given to clinics to have more admissions, and then you tag them as COVID-19. With regard to death certificates, there's a vast literature. Medical specialists have spoken out. The death certificates are fake. The CDC in the United States changed the criteria. Previously, they were using criterion determined in 2003, and the website of Robert Kennedy Jr. has revealed that if they had stuck to their previous criteria, the deaths attributed to COVID-19 would be 90% less. Okay, in other words, there's a fabrication of the deaths, of the causes of death. In some cases, somebody dies on a bicycle crash, and then of course he's identified as COVID-19. Heart attack, anything is COVID-19, pushing up the death rates and then creating panic with the support of the mainstream media. And what we have to do is to confront the lies, because the lies are being presented as the truth. And when the lie becomes the truth, there's no moving backwards. The tendency is towards a police state with a so-called vaccine, which would serve also as a digital passport. There are many different dimensions of this crisis, but let's organize and let's confront the fraudulent politicians and financiers who are behind this project.